Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming to the Luohan Webinar. Today, we are very honored and happy to have Professor Steve Tadelis. Steve Tadelis is a professor of economics and starring chair in the leadership and strategy at Berkeley Haas, and an academic community member of Luohan Academy. And his research primarily revolves around e-commerce and economics of the internet. Aside from the economics of e-commerce, his main fields of interest are economics of incentives, organization, reputation, and various topics in industry organization. His work has been published in the leading economics and marketing journals, such as the Journal of Political Economy, the Quarterly Journal of Economics, American Economic Review, and Econometrica. Not only on the academic field, he's also very active in understanding how economic research tools actually work out in business practices, as can be seen in his career as a leading economist at eBay from 2011 to 2013, and later at Amazon from 2016 to 2017. Today he's going to talk about his paper, The Counter-Stereotypical Messaging and Partisan Cues, Moving the Needle on Vaccines in a Polarized US. Steve, we are very happy to have you, and the floor is yours.
Okay, 谢谢. And for those of you who feel comfortable getting your video unmuted, that would be great, but no pressure. I want you to feel comfortable. Thank you, Ning. Okay, everyone. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I've participated in quite a few of these, and now it's my first time giving one of these Luohan lectures myself. This is joint work with Brad Larson from WashU, Tim Ryan from University of North Carolina, Steve Green and Mark Hetherington from North Carolina State, and Rasan from NYU, and myself. So scattered over 4 states right now. And let me get the ball rolling. So towards the end of 2021, there was an interesting political fact about vaccinations in the United States, and in particular, about 62% of Republicans were vaccinated. These are adults above the age of 21, compared to 91% of people who identify as Democrats. And interestingly, the Kaiser Family Foundation at the end of 21, towards the end, did a survey, and among the 27 of US adults that were unvaccinated, 60% identified as Republicans, as opposed to something I think between 30 and 40% of the population. So this is quite a skewed response. And another related outcome, by the fall of 2021, counties that historically have voted heavily for Trump had COVID death rates that were about 3 times as high as those who were heavily voting for Biden. And this was both on some of the news channels, and later there was an NBR paper that showed this more rigorously. And interestingly, there were many public service announcements or ads during the pandemic that were trying to get more people vaccinated. Some of the conjectures were that minorities, in particular Black Americans, were hesitant because of historical wrongdoings that were done to them. So some targeted minorities, and it was only tested with surveys or focus groups. So there really wasn't a measure of the outcomes. Now, the research question that we're asking here is, can messages that are catered specifically towards a Republican audience help move the needle on vaccinations? And let me first talk about the related literature. So this comes from a literature in political science, the motivation, or one would say the theory behind what we're doing, referred to as partisan cues, that constituents are going to respond to cues from party leaders or from media outlets that represent their preferences. I don't know how many folks in China are familiar with a US saying that says, it takes a Nixon to go to China. And the story really is that if you're considered a soft, pro-social Democrat, than trying to make peace with an enemy or with a country that relationships are not great with is going to be much harder than if you're a hardliner who says, people believe me when I say we could make peace because they know that I'm more extremely on the hawk side. Now, the political divide during COVID is clear from some of the data I showed you earlier, but interestingly, other studies, for example, smartphone location data, showed differences in social distancing in counties that leaned more Republican or more Democrat, where more Republican-leaning counties, social distancing was less observed than in the Democratic ones. And furthermore, there were some interesting studies that looked at trying to influence people to get more vaccines. There were a couple of papers that used lotteries to give people incentives to get vaccinated. They had roughly, in one study, about $68 spent per vaccine added, and in one it was $82 per vaccine. There was direct compensation done in Scandinavia in a different paper where it on average cost about $24 per vaccine to get people vaccinated. And then there's other literature on digital advertising effectiveness. We know that it's hard to measure effectiveness. So when we started this study, we were somewhat, I wouldn't say we were overly optimistic of detecting a signal. And especially when it comes to political persuasion, this is typically hard to measure. So with that in mind, let me talk about a motivating survey that kind of pushed us in the direction that we're going. So the folks at University of North Carolina, they've been running political view surveys about COVID-19. And there was one particular question that they asked a couple of times that is the following question. They targeted people who identify as Republicans, and they asked these unvaccinated Republicans, who do they express and this is a quote from the survey, great deal of confidence when it comes to advertising you on taking the COVID-19 vaccine. And they gave them different choices of who they trust with a great deal of confidence. And here were the results from two surveys, one in March, April 2021, one in August, September 2021. And notice that the person they trust the most when it comes to advising you on taking a vaccine is none other than Donald Trump. 40% in March, April, 41% in August, September. And those numbers are higher than your personal doctor, which, of course, to me at least, was surprising. And notice an interesting trend. As things became more politicized during 2021, you see that within this roughly 4 or 5 month span, there was a slight increase in the trust in Donald Trump and a significant decrease in the trust of your personal doctor. Only a quarter of those asked in the survey said that they put their doctor as a great deal of confidence when it comes to advising on taking a vaccine. Scientific community, it drops from 16% to 11%. Anthony Fauci, who was the head of this effort in the administration, in the Biden and in the Trump administration, 13 down to 11. And finally, Joe Biden, among unvaccinated Republicans, only 1 in 10 said that they trust Joe Biden. So with that in mind, we came up with the idea of creating a targeted ad that is going to feature Donald Trump as our messenger. Now, during this period, Donald Trump did not put in a lot of effort in advancing the idea of people getting vaccinated. But luckily, we found a couple of news clips that actually showed Donald Trump either being vaccinated or even supporting the vaccination. So what I'm going to do now is actually play you this YouTube clip, and I think you'll be able to hear it quite well. And then I'll discuss some aspects of this clip. So I would like to take credit for the wonderful editing, but we had a professional videographer who made this for us. And just to kind of anticipate some of the issues around the effectiveness of advertising, I won't be able to make any claims of how important that it's just Donald Trump and any video would have worked, or maybe the fact that this was so professionally done had an extra impact. That's not a question that we'll be able to answer. So here we go with the ad.
Donald Trump is urging all Americans to receive the COVID-19 vaccine.
I would recommend it, and I would recommend it to a lot of people that don't want to get it, and a lot of those people voted for me, frankly.
Both Trump and former First Lady Melania Trump did receive their vaccines privately in January at the White House.
So like I said, I wish I had that creative talent. I don't. But now let me tell you a little bit about important parts of this ad that we're going to take advantage of. So I'm sure I don't have to explain YouTube to any of you. And here is what the ad, at the beginning looked like. Now up here, there was this Fox 13 News Utah, March 16th, 2021. This is required by copyright law. So because we used an actual news segment, we have to give attribution. Now, it's a little hard to see, but down here, there is a link to the landing page of the original Fox story. So that if a viewer was curious to see whether this is really from a Fox story, they could click on this link, and then that takes them to the Fox channel in Utah that we took this clip from. And now, famously, many of you know that when there are ads, and this is an ad, you have this counting clock that goes down from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then you could skip the ad. And we're going to take advantage of variation in engagement that people had with the ad. Did they watch it longer? Did they watch it less longer? And we'll show you some of the effects. And it's actually nice that with the YouTube data, any advertiser could actually look at different metrics in order to look at the effectiveness of their ads. So what did we do in terms of launching this? So this was a randomized control trial that we did. We selected a little over 2,000 low vaccine counties in the middle of 2021. So these were counties that had less than 50% vaccinated adults over the age of 12. And we then also focused on counties with less than 1 million residents. The counties with more than 1 million residents are very large urban areas, and we excluded them from our analysis for skewness. We randomly assigned half of them to treatment and the other half to control. Now, the treatment means that this is a county that is eligible to see the YouTube ad. And those who are in control are not going to see the ad ever. Now, I focus on eligible because, as you'll see, this is all about intent to treat. In order to win, to basically be in front of someone who opens a YouTube channel and is watching, and if our ad is eligible, it means that we have to compete in the auction for that space, and there are other potential competitors. It could be Coca-Cola, it could be Amazon, it could be anyone who's advertising on YouTube. So the way we did it is we had about $100,000, a little under $100,000 that we spent on YouTube in the second half of October. We got about 11.6 million ads that were viewed, or at least put in front of people. That cost us an average of about $8.55 per 1,000 ad impressions, or CPM, as this is called in the ads literature. We hit over 6 million unique viewers, and some saw it more than once. 52% were watching on their phones, 30% on TV. This was actually news to me. I didn't realize that so many people actually watch YouTube on a TV screen. about 13% on tablets, and about 4% on computers. And the ad played on a little over 150,000 distinct YouTube channels. So what do I mean by YouTube channels? So the most impressions, a little over 200,000 impressions, was on Fox News. So Fox News has a YouTube channel. Forbes Breaking News has a YouTube channel. You see about 70,000 impressions on Forbes Breaking News, YouTube Movies, NBC, MSNBC, Fox Business, and these are all the many channels. You see it kind of has a very long tail, and we covered all of those channels. Now, here's an example of such a channel. So for those who are familiar with Fox News, here is a segment on Fox News, and our ad showed almost 3,000 times before this exact Fox News YouTube channel segment. Other popular Fox shows, Laura Ingraham, Greg Gutfield, Tucker Carlson, some of you may be familiar with these names. A lot of these are very right-wing talk show hosts, and others are news anchors. So this gives you an idea of what was shown and how it was shown. Now,
hi, Steve.
Yes, please.
Hi, Steve.
Hello.
Mac, yeah, I'm in Singapore right now. So I want to ask a couple of questions to help the audience, and including myself, understanding this better.
Sure.
The first question is about the content. So did Trump really say those things?
Exactly.
He did. So he advocated.
He rarely said those things. You're correct.
But so the content is true or not?
It is true. Absolutely. This was from a true YouTube Fox News. There were two segments that we put together in this ad. One was that news where you saw the anchor talk about Donald Trump. And then there was an interview with another Fox, very famous Fox anchor, where she interviewed Trump. And that's when he said, yes, I endorse the vaccine. People should take it. People voted for me. You should take it. So all that is true.
I see. So the second question is, you talk about those channels, and so you were supposed to pay them to show it, or anybody would be willing to do it? Right.
So we had to pay YouTube to put our ads on those channels.
Oh, I see. Got it. Okay. Yeah. No, please go ahead.
Right. So just thank you for that question, Luohan, because it actually is important to understand the institutional environment. So basically what happens, YouTube, which again, I don't use very often, but there are tons, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of channels on YouTube from all sorts of sources. If you go there and you watch it, you're going to get ads. And sometimes the ads are just at the beginning. Sometimes you'll have segments where maybe every 10, 15 minutes, you're going to get an ad. And what happens here is that in order to get an ad in front of someone, you go to YouTube like any other advertiser and you say, I'm targeting these geographies. That's how we were able to do the treatment and control of counties. You could also target age groups. You'll see in a second, I'm going to talk about that. You could even try to target gender and other aspects. Typically, those are a little noisier because it's based on YouTube's probabilistic belief that what the demographics are. And then you put in either a bid or you give them a budget and you ask them to bid for you. And then depending on the parameters of your campaign, like I said, counties, geographies, age groups, etc., depending on your budget and depending on their algorithm of where they think it's going to be most, received and looked at, they determine whether to show your ad or not show your ad. Okay, so that's how it works. Now let me actually talk a little bit about the auction details. So we took the approach of setting a budget and letting Google bid on behalf of us, the advertiser. Our our main target was that each advertiser's bid is determined by a target cost per mille, or cost per 1,000 ads. We chose $10 to be our target CPM, and like I said earlier, our realized average cost was $8.50. Other targets could also be used: age, gender, income, parental status, location. We primarily targeted the location because of our randomized control. And after, I think it was after about 10 days, we realized that a lot of our ads, because we could look at the summary statistics from the YouTube dashboard, were going towards younger people, because younger people typically watch YouTube. We also knew that younger people are less likely to respond to vaccinations. So we excluded ages 18 to 24 about halfway, a little more than halfway through the experiment. And I think that if we would have been smart and we would have thought about this in advance, we probably would have had even more significant results, and you'll see where those come in. And finally, Google's algorithm is going to be showing ads to people they believe are more likely to engage, watch more, and so on. And this creates an issue around endogeneity that we're going to deal with an IV approach, as I'll explain a little later. So what 1 + 4 together mean is that we're going to have a lot of variation of the number of our ads across counties. So the treatment is not uniform, and we're going to deal with this econometrically by allowing for a continuous treatment effect. And let me show you in a second.
Steve.
Yes.
Hi. Could I just?
Randy.
I know you're going to deal with it a bit later, but could I just ask a quick question on the Google's algorithm?
Sure.
So do you have any idea? I know it's a kind of a secret sauce, but do you have any idea what the contours of how it even makes that decision is? Like what kind of factors? And I guess the other related question is, you know, I can imagine that for like if it's showing it to a certain set of people, sorry, I'll just stick with the first part of the question for now.
Okay. So the short answer is no, we don't know what's happening in the black box. What we do understand from talking to these people, and I've engaged in some research with other companies that have similar algorithms, they basically have a machine learning algorithm that's trying to predict which customer, which viewers are more likely to engage with the ad. And the reason they're doing that is because when people engage with the ad, it typically increases ad performance for those advertisers who are trying to measure performance and so on. And you could even have ways to charge for clicks, not just impressions. So engagement is important. What goes into that machine learning algorithm, we don't know. And for that reason, we're going to have two types of analyses. One is just the intent to treat, where we're just doing treatment versus control, and there we're not concerned at all about any endogeneity issues. But once we're going to the extent of the treatment, the intensity of the treatment, there we're going to use an IV approach in order to deal with potential endogeneity that's coming from that algorithm. I hope.
Okay. And do you know if this changes through the campaign? Oh, does it learn actually from the campaign? Because it's easy to understand if someone likes sunglasses, you show them a sunglass ad. But for this, it's more complicated.
Right. My understanding is that in the period of our campaign, that the algorithm would not, be learning in that period. We had that conversation. I don't remember exactly how often they do those kind of updating. So I should look into that.
Okay, thank you.
That's actually a good point.
Yeah, let me, Steve, can I ask you a quick question? So you guys did not have the choice of which YouTube channel to show the ads, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you guys did not choose.
No, we don't target channels. We just say, okay, here's our geographies, here's our budget, do your magic. Okay, so you guys have no idea that those people the YouTube chose was
actually the people who have more probability to get vaccinated or who have more probability
Right.
to, like maybe prefer Fox News or Trump.
Now, from everything we understand about the algorithm and how things work, I really don't believe Google is able to predict the vaccination. Furthermore, Google doesn't, or YouTube doesn't know the objective of the ad campaign. So Google doesn't know that our objective is to try to get people vaccinated. So they definitely can't match based on that kind of prediction. The only thing they are trying to predict is engagement with ads.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so oh, go ahead.
Hi, Steve. I have a follow-up question, but it's more a ethical one, I think. I'm wondering whether you would think there is an ethical issue if you put an ad on YouTube persuading people to get vaccinated.
Wow. I think I presented this paper maybe 6 or 7 times. I never got asked that question.
Okay.
So here is the answer that I will stand behind. Given our belief that the vaccines save lives, and that we don't believe, and this is why most of our analysis is a one-tailed test, that this could cause people to not get vaccines, then we believe that either there's no effect and we didn't do anything, or there's a positive effect and we saved lives. I feel very comfortable with my ethical values. If other people feel differently, then I'm more than happy to have a conversation over some mint tea, because beers may not be the right liquid to have this kind of conversation over.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you for that question, Kaylin. It's a deep one. Okay, so here we could see the treatment control. So first of all, in gray are excluded counties. So remember, counties that are more than 50% vaccinated and that are more than 1 million people are excluded. So not surprisingly, almost all of the Northeast is excluded, heavily Democratic. You could see, and also the whole coast of California, Washington, most of Oregon is excluded. And for those very familiar with the American map, you're kind of looking at this and saying, why is Texas excluded? Because you could see all of Texas outlined here, where we know that Texas is heavily Republican. Well, what we're using as our measure of outcomes is actual vaccinations that we're getting from the CDC, the Center for Disease Control. And Texas did not report vaccinations to the CDC. So Texas is out by measurement. I'm just looking at the chat because I see some people are chatting. I'm curious about this issue. Is there, ethically, thank you, Kaylin. Yes, you asked it. Okay, so moving on, very quickly, some summary statistics. So county population, all counties, just about 47,000. You see that the treated counties about 46,000. The control count is about 48,000. Those are similar. Vaccine first doses before the campaign. So the CDC collects how many first dose vaccines were in every county. We see about 24,000 overall, 23,200 in treated, 24,900 in control. So again, quite similar numbers. And the number of counties, we have 1,083 in treatment and 1,085 in control. All these number of ads per 1,000 residents, interaction rate, view rate, click rate, these are all the treated counties because that's where the advertisement happened. So you see we have about close to 11,000 ads per county, about 20 ads per 100 residents. we have about, I'll talk more about interaction rate, view rate when I get to the analysis. These are measures of how engaged people were with the ads. It turns out that the number of ads per capita varied wildly across these counties. So you see, we have this typical, fat tail, long tail distribution. Interestingly, smaller counties, these are below the median population in our sample, had fewer ads per 100 residents. You see the gray distribution as opposed to larger counties. So we are actually going to control for size as well. There also, I'm not showing it here in a graph, but there seem to be different rates of uptake based on the size of the county. So we're controlling for size. So with that, let me go into our econometric specification, which is quite straightforward since we have a clean RCT. So first, an observation in our analysis is a given county I on a given date T. So our outcome variable of interest is total first dose vaccines to ages 12 plus in county I up through date T. And this is data coming from the CDC. It's important that these are first dose vaccines and not vaccines, because if you're taking your second dose, that means that you've already been convinced to get the vaccine. So the first dose are people who are getting that for the first time. We have a dummy for counties that are treated. We have a dummy for counties after the campaign started. And like I said, we're going to control for population. So we have the county's population. And here's our econometric specification. We're regressing the first dose vaccines on date and county fixed effects. This is our variable of interest, which is the intent to treat effect on the average county. So it's treat times post. And ADA is controlling for the population size and post, so after the campaign started. So again, beta is our variable of interest. So let me jump directly to it. Remember, we're doing a one-tail test because, this is an intervention. We're saying Trump could either convince people or not. We don't believe he's going to convince people not to get the vaccine. So we have 90%, at the 90% significance, we have about 102 extra vaccines on average in the treated counties. And this is clustered at the county level. Now, this is where we had an interesting surprise, I should say. So when we did the pre-registration, we were going to cluster at the state level. And the conventional wisdom is that the bigger the category that you cluster on, the more conservative you are, and the less tight are going to be the standard errors. Well, it turns out that when we cluster at the state level, we have 99% significance. But the county level is really the level of our randomization. Let me take a step back. Actually, we did a clustered randomization. So when we do the clusters at the cluster level of our randomization, we get something in between clustering at the county and clustering at the state. But we decided to take our most conservative analysis and cluster at the county level. Here we're controlling for county and date fixed effects and the pop post dummy. Here we're adding dummies for every date, not just for the post experiment. In the second specification, you see the results are almost identical. So how do we interpret these results? The average treatment county had an increase of about 102 vaccines. We had about 114 counties that were treated. And this implies that a total increase of about 104,000 vaccines. We spent about $96,000, which is less than $100 per county on average. And this implies that each vaccine costs us just under $1. If you remember the studies I mentioned earlier, those who used lotteries had about $60 to $80 a vaccine. Those that directly paid people had about $20 $5 vaccine. Here we're getting something much, much cheaper. Now, just to kind of preempt the obvious, I am sure that if we would run this test now, or say half a year ago, when more and more people are vaccinated, it probably means that those who aren't are much harder to convince. I'm sure that we wouldn't get such optimistic numbers, but we were very surprised by the cost effectiveness of these ads. So as I mentioned earlier, we want to look at the treatment intensity. In other words, if I'm showing a county more ads, are they then more likely to get vaccinated and not just a extensive margin? But of course, we have that possible endogeneity. We can't replace the treat dummy with the number of ads, because it could be that Google is sending more ads to counties that are more receptive, right? We don't know that. There's nothing from our conversations with Google that suggests that this is the case, but this is definitely something we need to worry about. So we're just going to follow Angrist and Imbens, our relatively recent Nobel laureates, to use an IV approach to estimate the effect of the increased treatment intensity. So remember, previously we had treat post. Now we're looking at ads in County I interacted with the post, meaning after the campaign, but we're not taking the ads that were shown. We're instrumenting for ads post using the experiment, using treat post. Everything else is the same. And delta hat is our coefficient of interest, which is the average causal response, the ACR, to an increase of 1,000 more ads per county, right? So that's the analysis that we're doing here. And here you see the results. This is what we had earlier, that the treated counties have about 100 extra vaccines. And here what we see is that for every 1,000 more ads, we have roughly 8.6 more vaccines per county. Or if you want to ask how many impressions do you need per vaccine, you need about 116 impressions to yield one extra vaccine. If I look across counties, the average county had about 10,000 ads. The standard deviation was about 25,000 ads, which means that one standard deviation increase in the number of ads is roughly 217 extra vaccines. Now, what's nice is that now that we could look at the intensity, it would be interesting to dive deeper into engagement. So let me pause for a second before, let me take that away, before I go into that. So if you think about engagement with an ad, then here in this particular case, there are different ways to look at engagement. So of course, I don't know if someone watched the ad. It could be that the ad went on and then I turned to my wife and started a conversation and then went back when the ad is over. Maybe I skipped the ad and so on. So we have, thanks to the Google portal and the data that they provide for advertisers, different ways to measure engagement. So let's start with the first one, which is engagement rate. So this is the fraction of users watching at least 10 seconds, which means that they didn't skip the ad immediately when they could have after 5 seconds. Now, again, we can't guarantee that they watched it, but at least we know that they didn't click on skip immediately after 5 seconds. And here we see that the average causal response was about 8.2 extra vaccines to a 1 standard deviation increase in the engagement rate. The next thing is view rate. So the view rate is the fraction of users watching the full ad. So these are people who didn't skip at all and the ad reached its completion. And here we get almost a 50% larger impact of a 1 standard deviation increase. So a 1 standard deviation increase in view rate is almost 12.5 ads. The next one is very interesting and definitely goes in the right direction. And this is the click rate. So let me just go back to this slide over here, remember that we had this link to the Fox station in Utah. When someone clicks on this, that gets registered in our campaign. So what we see here is that one standard deviation increase in the click rate results in almost 100 extra vaccines. Now, this is what, conventional wisdom in advertising would suggest. These are people who watched the ad and wanted to see if this ad really belongs to a TV station that for them is reputable. They do that, and for them, there's a very, very high impact of the ads. Then we have the ads per 100 residents. So just, simple measure. And here we have that one standard deviation increase in the ads per 100 residents is almost 50 extra vaccines. And finally, the weakest, and not surprisingly the weakest, is the cost per mille, or the cost per 1,000 vaccines. This is just a measure of how expensive it is to reach these people. So we're competing more heavily with other advertisers who want to reach these people. And that really is not that related to engagement per se, of people engaging more with the ad. So there is a positive effect, but it's weaker than all the other ones. So what this kind of somewhat monotonic, right? Engagement rate, view rate, you watch the whole ad, more ads significantly, and finally really going and engaging all the way with the channel suggests that this makes, as someone who's dealt in the advertising world for a bit, it kind of passes the smell test. It goes in the direction that we anticipated. Now, I'm just looking at the time. Yeah, I have another 15 minutes. I might finish a little early. So here we see the cumulative ad impression in millions over the 2 weeks of our ad campaign. Nice and monotonic, not surprisingly. And that means that instead of looking at during the experiment, post-experiment, pre-experiment, we could actually look day by day to see what this ad did. And this is what we're doing. We're basically replacing the post dummy with a dummy for each and every date, starting 13 days before the campaign started, remember, which was October 1, all the way to 30 days after. And we're going to add another dummy for 14 or more days before the campaign. That's what we call T lower bar. So again, our standard specification, number of vaccines, our fixed effects. Here's our treatment of the before 14 days or more. And here is all the betas of the indicators for everything that is 13 days before all the way to 30 days later. So we have like 43 dummies here. And then again, we're controlling for population in the same way. And now we're going to plot the estimate coefficients of our beta T. And here you see them either clustering here we're clustering at the state level, but I think we replaced these recently with clusters at the county level. And this is what's interesting. And in hindsight, I kind of hit myself in the behind for not thinking more about expanding the window of the campaign. As you could see here, you see a little uptick, but it really starts picking up about 10 days after the experiment. Now, there are several reasons that this might happen. In fact, I think here we could see the day-by-day change, where you could see in the early period with 95% confidence intervals, they all include 0. In the later periods, almost all of them don't include 0. So we're getting more significance, but remember, we're bunching these together in our main treatment. And basically going back here, there are 2 good reasons that we shouldn't see anything in the first week or 10 days of the experiment. Reason number one just goes to conventional wisdom in the advertising industry. Typically, ads need a little more time. People need to see them more than once. Now, a lot of people didn't see them more than once, but in this type of environment, it's possible that, let's imagine that Ning saw an ad, and then we have dinner that day, and he says, Steve, did you know that Trump endorsed the vaccine? Like, I didn't know. Let me show you, right? So a little bit of word of mouth, things like that. But the second thing that's just an institutional detail, during this period, for the most part, you needed to sign up to get a vaccine and register for an appointment. These appointments typically took days up to a couple of weeks. So it's even possible that people who watched the ad in the first few days of the ad decided that they want to get the vaccine, then they went to the website of either CVS or Safeway or Walgreens or any other website to sign up, and the first available vaccination might be a week later or 2 weeks later, and that could cause this shift that we see. So there are a lot of institutional details that are kind of working against us in terms of detecting a signal in the noise. I already went through this, and I'm going to conclude with this analysis that, in my opinion, is the most interesting and maybe most troubling of the results that we have. So we had a lot of counties, and even though we didn't have the level of significance that one would hope for, but we walked into this with eyes wide open because we know the ad literature and how difficult it is to measure signal in the noise. Then we decided to look at 3 demographic measures to look at heterogeneous treatment effects. The first is just purely political, and that is the percent of the share of Trump vote in the 2016 election. Now, we divided our sample into 2, above the median and below the median. Now, remember our target counties. These are counties with less than 50% vaccination rates, hence much more likely to be Republican. Our median county had a 70% Trump vote share, right? So this is clearly not a representative US county. And this is the result that we got that initially surprised us. And then later, I think we have a very coherent story, narrative of why this is. So it turns out that in low relative to high Trump share vote, we got a very strong result of 260 extra vaccines. Remember that average number of 102. This is almost 3 times as much. And it turns out that in the counties that are above median, there is no effect of the ads. And the interpretation that we're giving to this is quite intuitive, and it's the following. If you look and you follow the political discourse that was happening here in the United States, and that is still happening here in the United States, I guess the good news for the folks here from China is you have enough interesting stuff going on in China that you're not focusing, I hope, on what's going on in the US Congress these days, but it's enough said. So one of the things that seems reasonable is the following. If you think of Trump and what he represents, he's anti-establishment. He's like, let's, stick it to the man, clean the swamp, politicians are bad, blah, blah, blah. If you think that the counties that are more heavily Trump are people that are more extreme, less open to discourse on science, more set in their thoughts and what they're doing, whereas those that are less extreme are maybe closer to the median voter, less extreme in their views about the value of science and so on. This basically shows that if you're not too extreme, you were more influenced by this ad than if you are very extreme. So we think that this is interesting, and it kind of fits at least some intuition around politics. On college, above, below the median, no effect. On the education level, on race, weak significance. When we do this at the when we cluster at the state level, we get very significant results. But again, we're taking our most conservative numbers, and it turns out that when we have less whites, we're getting a more positive impact. And like I said, it's weakly significant, but not significant of the levels that we would like.
Steve,
yes.
Can I ask you one question? Yeah, on your explanation about the Trump.
Just a quick question. Does
Randy,
that intuitively?
Hold on, one at a time. So Sang-Woo, Sang-Woo, and then Randy.
Yeah. I think Randy maybe got internet some problem. Okay, so let me go first. Yeah. So about your the explanation you just gave us about the Trump, is it somewhat consistent with the psychology literature? For example, in the counter-stereotypical that theory. For example, if you show that maybe the same contents, counter-stereotypical contents to people more extreme compared to people more close to the medium.
Yeah. So it's a great question, because if it's just about political views, and I think this is where you're going, Sang-Woo, you would think there should be some monotonicity. Yeah. The more extreme I am, the more I'm convinced by your argument. The less extreme I am, I don't need someone extreme to convince me. The reason I don't think this is what's going on here, because it's not just about political leaning, I'm going to use an anecdote, which obviously we know is not data, but it's the best I have at the moment. I don't know if this made the news in China, but at the end of 2011, was it 2011? Yes, I think it was the end of 2011, and then early on in 2012, Trump started going on his, campaign type events, going to stadiums, talking to people. And there were several occasions where he endorsed the vaccine, and there were people in the audience that booed him, which means they were upset that he was endorsing the vaccine. And some of the narrative around it is that Trump was attractive to people who are anti-establishment, anti-anything related to science, so that when Trump says you should get the vaccine, these people view him as a traitor. Like, how could you say that? We thought you're one of us. So if I think of the very heavily percent Trump vote shares as more likely to have people who are just very extreme in their views, I'm trying really hard not to use the word crazy, so I'm not using the word crazy, that you just can't convince them, right? There's nothing you could say to get them vaccinated. I think that's why we have this kind of, think of it as maybe a non-monotonicity. Does that make sense, Sang-Woo?
Oh yeah. I think it's really interesting results. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Randy.
Steve, I was wondering how much do you think this is people who are looking for cover to get it, and because I'm not sure if this effect indicates that. Intuitively, at first glance, it seems to, but on the other hand, maybe there are more of those people in heavily Trump countries, right? They feel peer pressure.
Great question. There's no way we could answer that with the data. And being an economist, I wouldn't write a paper that's only based on survey data, and I think that would be the only way to get at this. Really great question, Randy. I have no idea, but it's a very reasonable hypothesis.
No worries. I was just curious about that question because it would seem to indicate who this would target if true, right?
Yeah.
No. Anyway, that just had that question in mind.
Yeah. No, it's a good question. So, Okay, I think, oh yeah, so before I conclude, I'm showing a more recent survey in 2022 that the political scientists, two of my co-authors are running the survey. They went beyond COVID and asked a survey about just other vaccines, okay? And it's interesting because there's a New York Times article that came out in the second half of 2022, or around this time, that talked about similar surveys that they did. So this is Democrats and Republicans, blue and red, respectively, with these questions on their survey. Have you gotten the seasonal flu vaccine? And you see Democrats almost 70%, Republicans a little over 50%. Do you agree that it's good for most healthy adults to get a flu vaccine? Democrats a little over 80%, Republicans a little below 60%. Do you agree it's important for children to get recommended vaccines? Democrats 90%, Republicans a little over 75%. Would you get a new vaccine for adult illness as soon as they are available? Democrats 55%, Republicans a little under 40%. Now, what's interesting, and this is that New York Times article that I just mentioned, they found some surveys from years ago where these differences did not exist. So it seems that the politicization of COVID and everything that happened around it spilled over to other health treatments. And we think that this is a bit alarming. So to conclude, right on time, counter-stereotypical messaging seems to help overcome political divide. So if I could, what I would do is I would have dinner with Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, who seems to be, the lead contender for the Democratic next round of presidential primaries, and say, you could save lives here. Why don't you message the right message when it comes to science, right? Secondly, our intervention was very cost effective. Again, at the time, replicating this now, I'm sure would yield other results. We had some ongoing work that kind of stalled. It's not clear of how much more we'll be able to do with this with a few other organizations. We're still analyzing some of those results. There have been some issues with implementation, so it could be that the signal to noise ratio is not going to get strong enough here, but we'll see where that goes. And that's it with a minute to go. So
Hi, Steve. Hi, Steve.
Yeah.
This is Long. I don't know how much the marketing literature have summarized this, the inside of the thing. I think it seems to me that more generally, this suggests that depending on the influencer and in the digital age, the power of marketing or persuasion is just dramatically different.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
So that's just much bigger. So is this so much more different in this era, or is it just a similar pattern? It's just more influential people, they're just doing so. But it seems to me that given that people are trying all different tests, seems to me that they do not understand this very well.
Yeah, so excellent question. I know there's been some work on influencers. At least when I looked at it, it did not seem very rigorous. There could be newer work lately. I think what is really tricky here is how context specific things are. So it could be that, say, for, again, this is intuitive. It could be that if I'm selling sports gear using Michael Jordan, not the machine learning Michael Jordan, the basketball Michael Jordan, is going to be a lot more effective than using Taylor Swift. But if I want people to buy, women's fashion shoes, then Taylor Swift is going to be a lot more influential than Michael Jordan, right? So I'm sure it's context specific, which would make generalized research somewhat challenging. The second thing that I realize is very, very hard to measure is the impact of the creative itself, namely how the ad was put together. So people who saw our ad said, wow, that's really cool, right? You know, the dramatic music, you know, the snippets, it looks very professional. I'm sure that if, say, me and my co-authors would slap together a video, it would not be as effective. And here I could kind of say a shout out to research that will most likely be released in 2 months. So I'm engaged in a project now with a large platform that does social media type advertising, and focusing more on small, medium businesses. And what we do see there, and this is the main part of the analysis, is that there seems to be very strong learning by doing by advertisers. So if you're a small business, you start advertising. As you engage and change things, you do better. And this advertising platform, I mean, the advertising is how the platform makes their money. It's not an advertising platform per se. They have different metrics that are based on some of these machine learning algorithms to try to measure the aesthetic of an ad. And it seems that ads that have higher scores do better. So again, this is an area where, as an economist, I have nothing intelligent to say, because I don't know what makes an ad more convincing, right? That's the psychology part. And I think, you know, there's a lot that could possibly be done around this. At the same time, given the subjectivity, I don't know how easy it would be to quantify these things in a rigorous way. Does that answer your question, Long?
Yeah, I think the logic has always been similar, right? It's
yeah.
Even in the different areas. It's just that I think in the digital era, it's just it's really make this much more scalable and much more cost efficient, and also because of network effect, all those stuff. So this is a primary fundamental issue. It actually changes so many things across disciplines, for marketing, for other stuff. Anyway, so I think a much better understanding of the nature of influencer in this age, quantified to some degrees, is much more helpful, and it's really also the story behind the logic behind your experiment.
Yeah. Thanks.
I think somebody.
Yeah, I just wonder. I had the same impression that Trump rallies, the participants would boo him off the stage if he even tried to say something about these vaccinations, of which he was himself so proud, I think. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm just wondering, did you look at whether, as the mortality rate, as the hospitalization rate went up in some of these Trump counties, did that affect these residents, or were they totally impervious to science, as you say?
Yeah, so during our experimental period, you know, none of those changes were happening.
Okay.
Right. So I mean, but it's an interesting question, because there is another recent paper that looks directly at death rates and by like 20 co-authors. I forget. I know that Abhijit Banerjee is on it, and Ben Olkin, and a whole bunch of other people. But no, I don't know if there's good research or any research on how those attitudes change as death rates may have started shifting based on vaccination uptake. It's a great question.
Thanks. I was just wondering if you had any kind of intuition or any kind of,
yeah, I mean,
grasp.
You know, as you could imagine,
yep.
Being in academia, living in Berkeley, I don't have a lot of strong Trump supporters around me to talk about these things with. But, you know, when you look at some of the narrative that's coming out of these very extreme places, it's clear that if the Red Sea opened in front of them by scientists, they wouldn't walk in, right? So yeah, I don't know, but it's a great question. I'll actually try to dig and see if there's anyone who did some.
And I think you're doing great work, and you're contributing to a lower death rate, and I salute you for your work, sir.
Thank you very much. That is much appreciated. I do have one friend on the dark humor side, who lives in a very democratic area, and since it seems that the people who got vaccinated are obviously Republicans. He told me that he's not going to tell his wife about our study because I might not be invited to their home. But like I said, dark humor.
It's a real shame, actually. Yeah,
I know.
Okay, yeah, I think the time is up, and yeah, it was really fantastic research, and yeah, really interesting facts and findings. And thank you again very much for Professor Tadelis, and thanks for the audience for participation. Yeah.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for the great questions.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah.
thank you all.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, Steve.
Bye-bye.